Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I am Steve Leibowitz. This week and for the next weeks and months, Israel has entered into a previously unknown area of potential constitutional crisis as all 15 High Court judges deliberate petitions to throw out basic law reasonableness. With Prime Minister Netanyahu visiting the U.S. and with the country in a holiday period, and despite a dramatic appeal from President Herzog, little, if any, effort appears to be underway to try to reach a compromise deal. Well, joining us to discuss possible ways out of the current judicial mess is a new guest to ILTV Insider, Professor Yedidya Stern of the JPPI, the Jewish People's Policy Institute, who has been involved in compromise efforts and has a suggested solution that he calls a thin constitution. And welcoming back Ari Harrow, a former chief of staff for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I'd like to start with, welcome back, Ari.
Thank you.
Yedidya, you've been involved in efforts to reach a compromise between the coalition and opposition. Is it too late for the sides to reach an agreement before the High Court makes its rulings?
No, it's never too late before the court is coming with decision. And I think the court will be happily giving the Knesset to make a decision and not to come in between the Knesset, the parties, and make a decision for us. The court is not the right place to make such a decision. Whatever the court will do will cause half of the people in Israel to be alienated from the court. And therefore, everybody is happy, will be happy if the Knesset will take over. However, right now, the Knesset is in recession. There are talks behind closed doors, non-stop talks. I cannot say that I'm optimistic about the outcome, but all I can say is that people are trying to figure out a way out of this, so to speak, dead end.
Thank you. Ari, why would Netanyahu travel to the U.S. now for an extended period when his presence is so required on this internal divisive issue? And once there, Elon Musk, he sits there with Elon Musk, and Musk points out the issue, the fact that there are protesters right outside the door in San Jose. Why would he put us through this?
So, firstly, this is the pinnacle, the diplomatic pinnacle of the Prime Minister's annual calendar. Every year, basically, since he has been Prime Minister, Netanyahu travels to the United Nations. He addresses the world stage. It's his opportunity to shine in a forum that is most comfortable to him. He is somebody who the Israeli public sees on that stage and views in a different light. And the opportunity to put himself out there in that light is something that he couldn't pass. I also think that the ability for photo ops with President Biden, with Zelensky, with Erdogan on the UN podium are just opportunities to really send a message not only to the international community that I am still a force to be reckoned with, but back in Israel that we're talking about an international leader.
Question is he still a force to be reckoned with? Yedidya, you suggested the concept of a thin constitution to solve Israel's current plunter. What does it mean? How does it differ from, let's say, a full constitution? And could we get the various bases in Israeli society to come on board?
Well, in a regular constitution, you have three parts. First part has to do with the identity of the state, the principles of the state. The second part is a full bill of human rights. And the third one has to do with the procedural, the way we share the power between the branches of government. Procedural issues. In Israel today, unfortunately, I don't think we can come into terms between us about the identity of the state, what is the meaning of Jewish and democratic state, and I don't think Israelis are ripe to accept a full bill of human rights, including equality. These questions are open in our society, but I think we must decide about the rules of the game. We have disputes, but what are the rules of the game by which we'll play our game, fighting each other on identity issues? Thin constitution, the concept I suggest, is basically the third part of the regular constitution, the procedural part. It will say what is the responsibility of the court vis-a-vis the other branches of government, and what is the place of the Knesset vis-a-vis the court, etc. Now, the feasibility of a thin constitution to actually be accepted by the people, coalition and opposition alike, I think is high, because nobody knows who will be in the opposition in a year or two from now. It might be that Yariv Levin will be in the opposition. So it's his interest as much as everybody's interest that the rules of the game will come up with a fair way of sharing the power between coalition and opposition, minority and majority. Now, we are trying to put together a group of legal experts, the best in Israel, that will sit down and try to figure out what might be these rules. And if we'll come up with a solution, we'll present it to the people, and hopefully the Knesset will look into it seriously and may adopt it. You have to realize that without it, right now, our national existence is based on shift sands. And the Knesset can come up with whatever kind of basic law they want, and then say, since it's basic law, there is no judicial review, and this is the last word. This is a dangerous situation, and that's what we are facing right now.
Ari, I wonder if you could think back to the time when you were in the Prime Minister's office. I know that Benjamin Netanyahu traditionally is a great Democrat and actually a liberal on a lot of these issues of constitution and judges and so on. Could you see Prime Minister Netanyahu, going for the idea of a constitution, even a thin one in Israel, if the political situation was right?
I think that last piece of your question is really the key to it all. Netanyahu, in my opinion, hasn't changed his colors. He is still that Democrat, he is still that liberal thinker. Ultimately, and to a certain degree, unfortunately, and this is another issue that has to be tackled at some point, is our electoral system here in Israel. But ultimately, every prime minister, be it Netanyahu, be it Lapid, be it Bennett, be it everyone in the past, their first and foremost priority is keeping their political coalition together. And when he looks to his right and he looks to his left, he sees a coalition that is tied extremely tight to the current issue of judicial reform, and therefore I believe that he has been trying to find a path out that allows him to reach some of the more liberal stands that are out there, while at the same time keeping his coalition intact.
He says he wants a way out when he's abroad, when he speaks to Musk and phone calls to Biden and so on. He wants a way out.
Correct.
And here he kind of sounds a little bit differently, but I mean, the two messages are a little bit different, the message to his base and the message to his friends abroad.
Right. I mean, there's definitely political posturing in that. I think ultimately, you look at Netanyahu, and historically you can see that what his real concern going into this term in office, he had two main goals. One of them was trying to reach a peace accord with Saudi Arabia, and the other was trying to deal with the Iranian nuclear threat. Everything else from his perspective is background noise. And that background noise, unfortunately, has gone to the point where it's so loud that he can't do what he himself set out to do. And ultimately, it's put our country in a very difficult situation.
When he delivers his message to the UN, they're going to want to hear what he has to say about democracy rather than about Iran and Saudi Arabia. Yedidya, as a legal scholar, a person involved and a relatively impartial participant in efforts to reach a judicial reform compromise, what would you say are the remaining obstacles to reach some kind of an agreement?
Well, we're talking about three levels. There is a professional level, legal issues, and I'm telling you, this is solvable. There is the political issue that Ari was referring to, and Netanyahu does not have too many options outside of his current coalition, which creates obviously a problem. That's why in Hebrew it sounds different than in English. And the third level, which is the most important one, is the emotional level, the lack of trust between the people involved, between our leaders. But when we come back to the professional aspect, I believe that the main obstacle right now is the decision about the makeup of the committee that selects judges in Israel. Levin, the justice minister, program is to politicize it. And the opposition in Israel, and I think the majority of the people in Israel, do not accept the politicization of the judicial branch, because this is the only branch in Israel that can actually have some kind of review of criticism of they look after what the government is doing, because the Knesset and the government in Israel is basically one. So we need independent court, and this is the main issue: how to maintain the court as independent in Israel while giving the majority, 64 Knesset members, what they want, change in current situation. This is a professional issue that I think is solvable if political and emotional issues will be solved.
Professor Stern, I wanted to follow up on that just with a comment, if you could, about Justice Minister Ohana's announcement that he says that if the court throws out the reasonableness law, he has an idea of throwing out the court, basically, or somehow replacing it with a constitutional court. Is the constitutional court in any way, shape, or form related to your thin constitution in concept?
Well, theoretically, you can think of this option. It exists in different countries, but you have to realize that you cannot compare different countries to Israel. It's like comparing elephant to zebra. There's no connection between the two animals. So the fact that you call it a court over there and court over here is not good enough. Now, regarding the issue of Ohana, the chair of the Knesset, actually, what he was saying is a very radical statement. He's saying, basically, I'm threatening you, the court, that if you intervene, I'm going to hurt you badly. Actually, I'm going to take the air out of the tire of the court, so to speak. This is a very radicalized kind of notion. And if something like this will happen, I believe that Israel may be facing no less than a civil war. And I really hope we will not go there. That's why it is so crucial, so important that right now our leaders in the Knesset, which is the right venue for this, will come to some kind of agreement and will not need a verdict by the court.
Yedidia and Ari, just ahead of the holiday, President Herzog sent a message to the diaspora relating to issues in Israel. Let's hear a few of his comments.
It's no secret that this year has challenged us in very real ways. For so many, this time of reflection takes on new meanings this year. As we've watched Israel struggle with big questions that highlight how big the differences between us can be. But friends, sisters and brothers, whilst our differences can be painful, they also point to an important and comforting truth. We all care deeply about our Jewish people and our beloved Jewish and democratic state of Israel. It is okay to have differences. In fact, having differences and being able to voice them is a sign of strength of our democracy and strength of our people. Our differences are our greatest asset.
Yedidia, the organization you had, the Jewish People Policy Institute, is a center of thought and planning for shaping strategy and action-oriented policy for the Jewish people in Israel and the diaspora. What are your thoughts on the Herzog message? Much of the diaspora must be feeling confused about the debate, no?
Obviously, first of all, not everybody in the diaspora understands the issue. And secondly, they're worried because they care. What I can tell my friends in the diaspora, two things. Number one, there is a covenant of fate, to use the terms of Rabbi Soloveitchik, that connects us. Whatever is happening here is influencing you, my brothers, and vice versa. Whatever happens to you influences us. So I think your involvement, you are not citizens, but you are part of the nation. Your involvement is very crucial to us. And I think Israelis should take care of your feelings when we talk about these issues. It's not only a general statement, it's a practical one, because you know that the court in Israel is the main way for diaspora Jewry to keep their, interest when we talk about religious pluralism here in Israel. And if the court will be stripped of power, it will hurt the pluralism in Israel. So I think you should care. That's number one. Number two, I'm proud to be Israeli today. And I think that my brothers abroad should be proud too, because listen, there's no other precedent of civil heroism as is happening right now in Israel. Almost no violence for 8-9 months of huge demonstrations between half of the nation against the government. And this is happening in a very heroic way. And I think eventually down the road, whatever the solution might be, I hope it will be within constitution, but whatever the solution might be, we'll remember these moments as heroic moments as Jews. And this might be also a message to other countries where they're facing the same kind of tension, not to mention America itself.
Ari, you've been with the Prime Minister in the past on trips to the United States, I'm sure including to the White House and other places. This trip is not going to be to the White House. The Prime Minister, though, is quite focused on the importance of this trip for Israel and the policy. And yet, everywhere he goes, he's meted with anti-government protests, anti-Bibi protests, shots of terrible things being said about the Prime Minister on the walls of places like Alcatraz. You're from LA. You know some of the Jews that might be out there protesting. What's your message to them?
Firstly, I think that it is tragic, and it's a reality that I wish we could have avoided. There are the differences that are very public here in Israel can clearly overflow to the U.S., but in such a public fashion, I think that it definitely harms our image and harms our common goals, whatever they should be. I think that the message to those living in the United States is that ultimately the people of Israel are not as divided as our politicians try to present it. The issues around the judicial reform, referring to the president's attempts to reach a compromise just a couple weeks ago, the Prime Minister's lawyer, it was reported, signed on the agreement. There was an actual agreement in place that was signed upon by the Prime Minister's legal representative. But yet, for political reasons, both sides moved away from it. And I think that if there's any message that we can convey, especially in this time of Jewish holidays, is that unity is what both sides really want, the people that is. And if our leaders can give us that, they'll be doing everybody a favor.
I know how deeply Israel is divided over this issue. How deeply or how much does the diaspora care about the issues of democracy and judicial reform in Israel?
Well, from what I hear, they do care a lot. I had the chance to talk to the conference of the presidents of Jewish organizations. And in the room, you had people who are ultra-Orthodox and liberals, all of them affiliated. And obviously, we know that about 35% of the Jews in America are unaffiliated. But regarding the affiliated Jews, this is the main concern. I know that in every shul, Reform as Orthodox, in Yom Kippur, they will be talking about what's going on to the nation state of the Jewish people. Well, I believe that we all share what might be called a Jewish moral, and the Jewish moral includes protection of minorities. American Jews are known to be very, very sensitive about human rights and rights of minority. This is the essence of their Judaism. And I feel that they can understand those in Israel who are afraid that taking the power away from the court might be on the expense of minorities. And that's why they care so much. And I encourage them to voice their opinions. The Prime Minister is right now in New York. Be there, tell him, respect him, but tell him what you feel about the needed solution to the most dangerous divide ever in Israel history between brothers.
We're almost out of time now, but Ari, let me ask you this. You just heard the words of Professor Stern, and you could get yourself into the head of Netanyahu. Is there anything that the professor said that Netanyahu wouldn't actually agree with, beyond the political issues of his coalition? Is there anything that he said that Netanyahu wouldn't sign on?
I don't think so. I think that Professor Stern has made it very clear that there's a very strong basis for some type of judicial reform. And I think that those who are honest with themselves, including amongst the public, and you see it in poll after poll after poll, the issue is not judicial reform as is being presented. It's rather the threat, as some may see it, to our democracy. And I think that as long as we are able to confine these reforms to more broadly accepted fronts, we can bring the people together. And I think that that's exactly where Prime Minister Netanyahu would love to see this country headed, love to see this government headed, so that he can get back to the real issues facing us.
Professor, just in our final moments, if I could, the Jewish people now reached the new year. We're almost, I think, 20 million, almost 10 million in Israel, another 10 million or so in the diaspora. Are we going to be doing better at this time next year, or not as well?
I think we have to be in tune with what we are going, all of us, to say in Yom Kippur, in Shul. We'll hit our heart and we'll say, Ashamnu Bagadnu, we have sinned. And we do it and we say it in a plural tense, Ashamnu, all of us. I think that if each of us will hit on his chest, not on the chest of the other, this will be a beginning of a new horizon for us for next year. I'm optimistic by nature, and I think that what we have seen last year was a wake-up call, and it's time to fix it. Next year should be the year of fixation of the problem. And Shana Tova to everybody.
Professor, thank you so much for that message. Well, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you to our guests, Yedidia Stern, head of the Jewish People's Policy Institute, and Ari Harrow, former Chief of Staff for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Steve Leibowitz. This was ILTV's Insider. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching, and shalom from Israel.